Dr. Marcus Hale didn't hesitate when the monitor flatlined. He moved first, but seconds later the operating room turned into a courtroom. And he became the one on trial. No questions, no proof, just silence. And judgment. The same hands that trusted him now pointed at him. They thought the quiet black doctor would take the blame and disappear. But then the footage starts playing. And in one moment, the man they accused becomes the reason everything falls apart. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Saint Aurora and the Familiar Silence. A cold wind moved through downtown Chicago just before sunrise, carrying the sharp scent of early winter across glass towers and empty streets. The sky was pale gray, the kind that made the city feel distant, almost quiet, until the doors of St. Aurora Hospital opened and the rhythm of another relentless day began. Dr. Marcus Hale stepped inside without hesitation. Dr. Marcus Hale was a 35-year-old African-American physician, tall, with a lean, controlled build that reflected years of discipline. His deep brown skin contrasted sharply with the crisp white of his coat. His face was defined, high cheekbones, a firm jawline, and steady dark eyes that rarely revealed what he was thinking. His hair was short, tightly coiled, always neat. He spoke calmly, never louder than necessary, and carried himself with a quiet precision that made his movements efficient, almost deliberate. But what most people didn't see was what shaped him. Years earlier, during his residency, Marcus had been blamed for a complication he didn't cause. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself loudly, he simply worked harder, learned more, observed more, and built a habit of letting results speak instead of words. That moment didn't break him. It refined him. But it also taught him something else. Silence could be mistaken for weakness. And St. Aurora was a place that noticed silence. The hospital was known across Chicago for excellence. Cutting-edge equipment, renowned specialists, spotless hallways that reflected light like polished glass. But beneath that perfection, there was something harder to see. A pattern. Subtle, unspoken, but consistent. Conversations that paused when certain people walked in. Opportunities that seemed to shift quietly from one person to another. Respect that felt selective. Marcus walked through the corridor, nodding briefly at staff members as he passed. Some nodded back politely. Others looked past him as if he were simply part of the background. At the nurse's station, Emily Carter was already reviewing patient charts. Emily Carter was a 29-year-old white American nurse, medium height with a slim, practical build. Her light brown hair was tied into a loose ponytail, a few strands always escaping around her face. She had soft green eyes that carried a constant sense of observation, like she noticed more than she said. Her posture was relaxed but attentive, and her voice, when she spoke, was calm, measured, and quietly reassuring. Emily had grown up in a small town in Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a local clinic. She had seen firsthand what it meant to be overlooked, to be unheard. That experience shaped her, made her careful, empathetic, and unwilling to judge too quickly. She looked up as Marcus approached. "Morning, Dr. Hale," she said, offering a small, genuine smile. "Morning, Emily," Marcus replied. It was a simple exchange, but in a place like St. Aurora, even something simple could feel different. Emily respected Marcus, not because of reputation or hierarchy, but because she had watched him. She had seen how he stayed late for patients others had already signed off on, how he explained procedures in a way people could actually understand, how he never rushed through a conversation, even when time was against him. And she had also noticed something else, the way others responded to him. Across the station, a group of younger doctors stood together, their voices low but their tone unmistakable. Dr. Evan Blake leaned casually against the counter, arms crossed. Evan Blake was a 32-year-old white American physician, tall with an athletic build and a polished appearance that seemed almost effortless. His sandy blonde hair was neatly styled, his blue eyes sharp but often carrying a hint of impatience. His jawline was clean, his posture confident, bordering on arrogant. He wore his authority comfortably, like something he had always expected to have. Evan came from a family of doctors. Legacy, connections, expectations. He had never questioned whether he belonged in places like St. Aurora. To him, success wasn't something to prove. It was something assumed. He glanced briefly in Marcus's direction, then leaned closer to the group beside him. Some people get by just being quiet, Evan said, his voice low but audible enough. A few of the others chuckled lightly. Marcus didn't react, he simply continued walking. That, more than anything, seemed to irritate them, because they weren't looking for silence. They were looking for a reaction. Inside examination room 3, Marcus reviewed his first patient of the day, an elderly man with early-stage heart complications. Marcus sat beside him, not standing over him, and explained the condition slowly, clearly, making sure every word was understood. No rush, no shortcuts. Outside the room, footsteps passed. Voices overlapped. The hospital moved quickly, but inside, Marcus controlled the pace. Because to him, medicine wasn't about speed. It was about responsibility. Later that morning, the staff gathered briefly in the conference room for a routine update meeting. At the front stood Dr. Richard Whitmore. Dr. Richard Whitmore was a 58-year-old white American chief physician, tall with a lean, refined build. His pale skin and angular features gave him a sharp, almost rigid appearance. His steel blue eyes were precise, analytical, rarely emotional. His silver-gray hair was combed neatly back, and his posture was always straight, controlled. He spoke with authority, each word deliberate, leaving little room for interpretation. Whitmore had spent decades building his career. Discipline, control, reputation, those were his pillars. He valued efficiency above all else, and while he believed in fairness, his version of fairness was often shaped by what maintained order, not what challenged it. As you know, Whitmore began, glancing at a tablet in his hand, we are reviewing candidates for the upcoming leadership position in the cardiac unit. A brief pause. Dr. Evan Blake has been selected for consideration. There was a quiet shift in the room, subtle but noticeable. Marcus remained still. He had been here longer, had more experience in critical cases, had taken on additional responsibilities without recognition. But his name wasn't mentioned, not even as an option. Whitmore continued speaking, outlining expectations, performance metrics, future plans. The meeting moved on as if nothing unusual had happened. But something had. Emily noticed it immediately. Her eyes moved briefly toward Marcus. Not out of pity, but awareness. She knew. Everyone knew. They just didn't say it. After the meeting, conversations resumed in small groups. Some congratulated Evan. Others discussed logistics. A few glanced toward Marcus, quickly, then away. Marcus gathered his notes quietly. No frustration on his face, no visible reaction. Just the same calm. But inside, something registered. Not anger, not surprise, recognition, because this wasn't new. This was a pattern. And patterns told stories. As the day continued, small moments repeated themselves. A suggestion Marcus made during rounds was acknowledged, but only after Evan rephrased it. A nurse hesitated before confirming Marcus's instructions, then immediately accepted the same directive from another doctor. A patient's family asked, "Are you the attending?" Despite his badge clearly stating his position, none of it was loud, none of it was direct, but together it formed something undeniable. By late afternoon, the sky outside had darkened. Chicago's cold pressed harder against the windows, the city lights beginning to flicker on, one by one. Marcus stood alone for a moment near the observation window, reviewing a chart. Behind him, the hospital moved as it always did. Efficient, controlled, predictable. But beneath that order, something else was building. Not an incident, not yet, just tension. The kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that waits. Marcus closed the file slowly, then turned back toward the corridor. Still calm, still steady, Still exactly who he had been that morning, because whatever this place expected him to become, he hadn't changed, and he wasn't going to. The critical night. By early evening, Chicago had turned colder. The wind pressed harder against the glass walls of St. Aurora, and the city lights reflected like scattered signals across the darkened sky. Inside the hospital, the pace had shifted. Faster, sharper, more urgent. The calm structure of the day was giving way to the unpredictability of the night shift. Dr. Marcus Hale stood at the central station, reviewing updated charts with the same steady focus he carried all day. The earlier meeting, the quiet dismissal, the subtle patterns, none of it showed on his face, but his attention had sharpened. Not defensive, not tense, just precise. Emily Carter approached quickly, her steps more urgent than usual. Dr. Hale, incoming emergency cardiac trauma. ETA 3 minutes. Marcus looked up immediately. Vitals? Unstable, severe arrhythmia, possible internal complications, Emily replied, already preparing a tablet with incoming data. Her calm tone held, but her movements were faster now. Marcus nodded once. Prep or 2. Full support. Across the room, Evan Blake straightened, his expression tightening slightly. I'll take lead on this one, he said, stepping forward, voice confident but edged. Marcus didn't raise his voice. You'll assist, I'll handle primary. The room went still for a fraction of a second. Evan's jaw tightened. Not visibly enough for most, but enough. Right, he replied, though the word carried resistance beneath it. There was no argument. Not here. Not now. Because the patient was already arriving. The doors burst open as the gurney was pushed in, wheels moving fast across the polished floor. A team of paramedics surrounded the patient, voices overlapping in controlled urgency. Male, mid-50s, cardiac collapse en route, unstable rhythm, lost responsiveness twice. Marcus moved alongside them instantly, eyes scanning, processing. Get him to OR2 now. Move. The patient was transferred without delay. As they rushed down the corridor, a figure appeared near the entrance of the operating wing, someone who didn't belong to the rhythm of the hospital. James Carter stood still, watching. James Carter was a man in his early 60s, tall with a broad but aging frame that carried quiet authority. His skin was a deep, weathered brown, his face lined with years of experience rather than fatigue. His eyes were sharp, observant, trained to notice what others overlooked. His hair was short, graying at the edges, and he wore a dark overcoat that contrasted with the sterile brightness around him. He had once served as a federal judge. Decades in courtrooms had shaped him, measured, patient, and impossible to intimidate. But beneath that control was something else now. Concern. He didn't speak as the team passed, he just watched Marcus, then turned and followed at a distance. Inside OR2, the lights came alive. Bright, focused, unforgiving. The room shifted instantly into a controlled environment of motion and precision. Machines activated. Monitors flickered to life. The steady rhythm of preparation filled the air. Marcus stood at the head of the table. Vitals, he said. Dropping. Irregular spikes. Emily responded from the monitor. Set support. Now. Evan moved to the adjacent station, his movements efficient but slightly sharper than necessary. Systems lagging, he muttered, tapping at the interface. Marcus glanced briefly. Focus on manual override. Evan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pressed another command. For a second, just a second, the monitor flickered. A subtle glitch, then stabilized. Marcus noticed. Did you see that? He asked, voice still calm. Evan shrugged slightly. Probably just a delay, systems old. Marcus didn't argue, but his eyes lingered for half a second longer than usual. Across the room, another figure stood near the equipment console, quiet, almost unnoticed. Noah Reed. Noah Reed was a 38-year-old medical systems engineer, medium height with a slightly hunched posture from years spent leaning over machines. His build was average, his movements careful, almost hesitant. He had pale skin, dark circles under his eyes, and messy black hair that never seemed fully under control. He wore a simple technical jacket instead of medical scrubs, marking him as someone outside the core medical team. Noah wasn't loud. He wasn't authoritative, but he knew systems. Every circuit, every line of code, every hidden flaw. He had joined St. Aurora years ago after leaving a larger institution where his warnings about equipment failures had been ignored. That experience made him cautious, observant, and sometimes quiet when he shouldn't be. He watched the monitor, then frowned, but said nothing. Marcus turned back to the patient. "We're losing rhythm. Stabilize now." Emily adjusted the settings quickly, attempting correction. Evan stepped in. "I've got it," he said, overriding manually. Marcus allowed it, but stayed close. The tension in the room wasn't loud. It was layered. The machines hummed steadily, but underneath that sound was something else. Uncertainty. Subtle. Hard to define. The patient's condition fluctuated rapidly. Numbers rose, dropped, spiked again. Marcus adjusted, responded, adapted. Every decision was precise. Every movement controlled. But the system wasn't consistent. Another flicker. This time longer. Emily looked up. "That's not normal." Evan exhaled sharply. "We don't have time for this. Just keep going." Marcus's eyes shifted again, quick, calculating. "Stay alert," he said. No panic, no hesitation, just awareness. Minutes stretched. The room felt tighter, more focused. The patient stabilized briefly, then dropped again. Marcus moved immediately. "Now, we intervene." Evan stepped closer. "You sure about that call?" Marcus didn't look at him. "Yes." That was all. The procedure continued. Each second mattered. Each decision carried weight. And still, the system didn't feel right. From the corner of the room, Noah's gaze moved between the monitor and the control panel. His fingers twitched slightly, as if he wanted to step in, but didn't, because this wasn't his space. Not yet. Outside, behind the glass, James Carter stood still, watching everything unfold through the observation window. His expression didn't change, but his eyes followed Marcus. Every movement, every decision, not with doubt, with focus. Inside the room, the final sequence approached. Marcus gave a final instruction. Emily executed immediately. Evan followed, reluctantly but precisely. The monitors steadied, then held. A fragile stability. The room didn't relax. Not yet. Marcus remained still for a moment, watching the numbers. Confirming. Calculating. Then finally, "Hold it there," he said quietly. No one spoke. The machines continued their steady rhythm. The patient was alive, but something about the process didn't sit right. Marcus stepped back slightly, eyes still on the system. Evan removed his gloves with a sharp motion. "Well," he said, exhaling, "that was messy." Marcus didn't respond. Emily glanced at the monitor again, her expression thoughtful. Noah remained in the corner, staring at the system logs now scrolling quietly across the screen. And outside the glass, James Carter didn't move, because for him, the procedure wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. Inside the room, the team began to reset, to clean, to move forward. But the tension didn't leave. It stayed, unspoken, unresolved, and unnoticed by most. Marcus removed his gloves slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes were thinking. The accusation. The night did not slow down after the operation. St. Aurora remained awake in its own controlled rhythm, lights humming softly above sterile floors while the city outside sank deeper into darkness. But something had shifted inside the hospital, subtle at first, almost invisible, like a change in pressure before a storm. Dr. Marcus Hale felt it before he saw it. He stood at the central station again, reviewing the post-operative report. The patient was stable for now, but the inconsistencies during the procedure stayed in his mind. The flickers, the delays, the brief moments where the system didn't respond the way it should have. He was still reading when 2 administrative staff members approached him. "Dr. Hale," one of them said carefully, "the board would like to see you, immediately." Marcus looked up. "Now?" "Yes, conference room B." There was no urgency in their tone, just formality. That alone was enough. Marcus closed the file without hesitation. Understood. As he walked down the corridor, he noticed the difference. People were quieter, not because of the time of night, but because of him. Conversations paused as he passed. Eyes shifted. Some avoided contact entirely. Others looked just long enough to register something new. Awareness. Or suspicion. At the nurse's station, Emily Carter watched him go. Her expression didn't change, but her grip on the tablet tightened slightly. Something wasn't right. She could feel it, but couldn't yet name it. Inside conference room B, the air felt colder than the hallway outside. Dr. Richard Whitmore sat at the head of the table, posture straight as always, his expression unreadable. Beside him was another figure Marcus hadn't expected to see, Linda Graves. Linda Graves was a 47-year-old hospital legal advisor, tall and slender with sharp features that made her seem older than she was. Her pale skin contrasted with her dark, tightly pulled-back hair. She wore a fitted charcoal suit, every line precise, every detail controlled. Her eyes were gray, cold, observant, and calculating. She had spent years handling institutional crises, learning how to contain problems before they spread. Linda wasn't here to ask questions. She was here to manage outcomes. Marcus took a seat across from them. Whitmore folded his hands. "Dr. Hale, thank you for coming." Marcus nodded slightly. "You asked for me." A brief silence followed. Then Linda spoke first. "There was a complication during the procedure tonight," she said, her tone calm, almost neutral. Marcus didn't interrupt. Whitmore continued. "We've received preliminary reports indicating a deviation from standard protocol." Marcus's eyes remained steady. "Based on what?" Linda slid a tablet across the table. "Internal documentation. Initial observations from the surgical team." Marcus glanced down. The report was incomplete, selective. Certain moments highlighted. Others missing. He looked back up. "This isn't a full account." Whitmore's expression didn't change. "It's enough to raise concern?" Marcus paused. Not long. Just enough to choose his next words. "The system was unstable during the procedure," he said. "There were delays, irregular responses. That needs to be reviewed before any conclusion is made." Linda's gaze sharpened slightly. "At this point, Dr. Hale, we are focused on responsibility." There it was. Not truth, responsibility. Marcus leaned back slightly. "Then review everything." Whitmore exchanged a brief glance with Linda, then spoke again, slower this time. "Dr. Hale, St. Aurora has a reputation to maintain. Situations like this, if not handled carefully, can escalate quickly." Marcus didn't respond, because he understood what was being said, and what wasn't. Whitmore continued. "We believe it may be in everyone's best interest if you step down voluntarily while we conduct further review." The room went completely still. Marcus looked at him. Not surprised, not angry, just certain. "You want me to resign?" he said. Linda answered this time. "We're offering you a way to avoid unnecessary complications." Marcus held her gaze for a moment, then asked one question. "Has anyone reviewed the system logs?" A pause, not long, but enough. Whitmore shifted slightly. "That's not the priority right now." That was the answer. Marcus nodded once, then stood. "I won't resign," he said calmly. No raised voice, no emotion, just clarity. The silence that followed was heavier than anything spoken. Linda's expression hardened slightly. Whitmore's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in calculation. "Then we proceed differently," Linda said. Marcus didn't respond. He simply turned and walked out. Outside the room, the hallway felt different again. more distant, more defined. The moment had passed, but its effect was already spreading. Back at the nurse's station, Emily looked up immediately as Marcus returned. She searched his face, not for answers, but for something she couldn't quite describe. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Marcus picked up a chart. "They're reviewing the procedure." "That's it?" "For now." Emily hesitated. "Something was off in there," she said. "The system." "I know," Marcus replied. "That was all, but it was enough." Across the hospital, something else was already moving. An internal email. Sent quietly, forwarded quickly. By midnight it had reached nearly every department. Subject, Incident Review, or 2. The message was carefully written, formal, neutral on the surface. But between the lines the implication was clear. Concerns had been raised regarding procedural decisions. Further review was underway. Leadership would address the matter accordingly. No names were stated directly. But one name didn't need to be. Marcus Hale. At the far end of the corridor, a group of staff members stood together reading the message on their phones. Whispers began. Soft. Measured. But spreading. "He was leading, right? I heard there were issues. Didn't look good." No one said it directly. They didn't have to, because the narrative was already forming. And once a narrative begins, it moves faster than facts. In a quiet corner near the equipment wing, Noah Reed stood alone, staring at his screen. Lines of system data scrolled in front of him. Timestamps, error flags, signal interruptions. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He had seen the flicker. He had seen the delay. He knew something wasn't right. But he also knew how this worked. Speaking up meant stepping into something bigger, something complicated. He leaned back slightly, then closed the file, for now. Across the hall, James Carter stood near the window again, looking down at the city lights below. He had read the email. His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened, because he had also seen something else, in the operating room, something that didn't match the story being told. Back at the station, Emily reread the email for the third time. Her brows furrowed. "They're already framing this," she said quietly. Marcus didn't look up. "Yes." "That's not right." "No," he said. Another pause, then Emily spoke again, softer this time. "You're not the problem in this." Marcus finally looked at her. Not surprised, not reassured, just aware. "I know," he said, and for the first time that night, there was something different in his voice, not doubt, not frustration, but resolve. Around them, the hospital continued as if nothing had changed. Patients were treated, charts were updated, machines kept running. But beneath that surface, a decision had already been made, not by evidence, not by truth, but by assumption. And Marcus Hale stood in the center of it, not defending, not reacting, just standing. Because this wasn't the first time he had been here, and something told him it wouldn't be the last. The unexpected voices. The next morning arrived with a sharper cold. Chicago's skyline stood under a pale metallic sky, the kind that made everything feel exposed. At St. Aurora, the usual rhythm returned on the surface. Patients moved, staff rotated, charts updated, but beneath it, tension had settled into something more permanent. It was no longer a quiet shift. It was pressure. Dr. Marcus Hale walked through the corridor as he always did. Steady, composed, unaffected in appearance. But the difference now was visible in how others responded. Conversations didn't just pause, they ended. People didn't just glance, they evaluated. The email had done its job. At the central station, Emily Carter stood reviewing patient updates, though her attention wasn't fully on the screen. She looked up as Marcus approached, her expression more direct than before. "They've scheduled a follow-up review," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "I expected that." Emily hesitated. "People are talking." "They always are," Marcus replied. But this time, it was different. Because now, the narrative had direction. Across the floor, Evan Blake stood speaking with 2 other doctors. His tone was controlled, but there was something new beneath it. Certainty. Not proven certainty. Assumed certainty. She made the call too early, Evan said, not lowering his voice enough. That's what caused the instability. One of the doctors nodded slowly. That's what the report suggests. Marcus didn't react, but Emily did. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in recognition, because she had been there. And that wasn't what happened. Before she could speak, a presence entered the hallway that shifted the atmosphere in a different way, not subtle, not quiet, deliberate. James Carter walked through the main corridor without hesitation. He was dressed the same as the night before. Dark overcoat, measured steps, posture straight despite his age, but in daylight, there was something more visible about him. Authority wasn't something he displayed loudly, it was something he carried without effort. Staff members noticed immediately, not because they recognized him, but because he didn't move like a visitor. He moved like someone who expected answers. He stopped at the nurse's station. "I'm looking for the physician who led the procedure last night," he said. His voice was calm, controlled, but there was no room in it for dismissal. Emily met his gaze. Dr. Hale?" James nodded once. "I'd like to speak with him." Marcus stepped forward before she could say more. "That would be me." For a brief moment, the 2 men looked at each other, assessing. James spoke first. "You were in charge?" "Yes." Another pause. James studied him. Not the coat, not the badge, but the person. Then he said something unexpected. "You didn't hesitate." Marcus didn't respond immediately. "I did what was necessary," he said. James nodded slowly. "That's what I saw." Behind them, conversations had stopped again, but this time not because of Marcus, because of James. He turned slightly, glancing toward the corridor where staff had gathered in quiet observation. "I've read the report," James continued, "and I've read the email." His voice didn't rise, but it carried, and neither one matches what I witnessed. That changed something. Not loudly, but noticeably. Marcus remained still. "What are you asking?" James's expression hardened slightly. "I'm asking why the truth isn't being reviewed." Before Marcus could answer, another voice entered the moment. Careful, uneasy, but it is being reviewed. Noah Reed stepped forward from the equipment wing, holding a tablet close to his chest. He looked slightly out of place in the open corridor, like someone more comfortable behind systems than people. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his movements restrained, but his eyes were focused. James turned toward him. "And you are?" "Noah Reed, systems engineer." James studied him briefly. "You were present last night?" Noah nodded. "Monitoring equipment?" A pause. Then Noah did something he hadn't done before. He stepped fully into the conversation. "There were irregularities," he said. The hallway went still again. Evan Blake shifted slightly across the room, his posture tightening. "What kind of irregularities?" James asked. Noah hesitated for a fraction of a second, then answered. "System response delays, signal interruptions, it wasn't stable." Evan stepped forward now. "We all saw minor delays, that's not unusual." Noah shook his head slightly. This was different. His voice wasn't loud, but it was certain. James's gaze sharpened. "Can you prove that?" Another pause, longer this time because now the line was clear. Noah looked down at his tablet, then back up. "I can show logs," he said. Emily's eyes widened slightly. Marcus didn't move, but something shifted. Evan crossed his arms. "Logs can be misinterpreted." Noah didn't look at him. "Not these." The tension in the corridor thickened. Not chaotic, not loud, just undeniable. James took a step closer to Noah. "Then show them." Noah exhaled slowly, then tapped the screen. Lines of data appeared, timestamps, signal patterns, interruptions. At first glance, It looked like noise, but James didn't rush. He leaned in slightly, reading and understanding. "These gaps," James said quietly. "They shouldn't be there." "No?" Noah replied. Marcus stepped closer now, eyes scanning the data. His expression didn't change, but his focus sharpened. Emily moved beside him, looking at the screen. "This matches what we saw," she said under her breath. Across the hall, Evan's expression hardened. "This doesn't prove anything," he said. Noah finally looked at him directly. "It proves the system wasn't functioning normally." A beat, then something else. Noah scrolled further and stopped. His brow furrowed. "That's not right," he said. James noticed immediately. "What is it?" Noah didn't answer right away. He tapped again, zoomed in, compared timestamps, then looked up. "Some entries are missing." The words didn't land loudly, but they landed heavily. Marcus's eyes shifted slightly. "Missing how?" he asked. Noah hesitated, then said it. "Edited." Silence. Complete. Because now, this wasn't just about failure. It was about interference. James straightened slightly. "Who has access to these logs?" he asked. Noah's voice was quieter now. "Senior system clearance." Which meant not everyone. Evan stepped back slightly. Just enough. Emily noticed, Marcus noticed, James noticed everything. He looked around the corridor slowly, taking in the faces, the reactions, the silence. Then he spoke again. Calm. Precise. "I want an independent review." The words cut through everything else. "This isn't just a medical matter anymore." No one responded immediately, because no one could, not without stepping into something bigger. James turned back to Marcus. "If what I saw is true, then this isn't on you." Marcus held his gaze, then nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. Around them, the hospital continued its motion, but the direction had changed, because now the narrative wasn't controlled. It was questioned. And once a question exists, it doesn't disappear. It grows. At the far end of the corridor, a staff member checked their phone, then looked up quickly. "Local media's picking it up," they said quietly. No one needed to ask what it was, because now it wasn't contained anymore. Marcus stepped back slightly, his posture unchanged. Still calm, still steady, but no longer alone in the silence. Because now, someone had seen, someone had questioned, and someone had started to push back. The truth beneath the surface. By midday, the cold outside had given way to a pale, washed-out sunlight. But inside St. Aurora, the atmosphere had only grown heavier. What had started as quiet suspicion was now moving with direction. The hospital no longer felt controlled. It felt watched. Dr. Marcus Hale stood in a smaller conference room this time, not alone. The setting was different from the previous meeting, less formal but more intense. A rectangular table, dim overhead lighting, a screen mounted on the wall. The kind of room used not for discussion, but for examination. Across from him sat Dr. Richard Whitmore, posture unchanged but eyes sharper than before. Beside him was Linda Graves, her expression even more calculated now, as if each second was being measured against potential risk. To the side stood James Carter, silent but observant, arms folded, his presence alone shifting the balance of the room. And near the screen, Noah Reed. He stood slightly off-center, tablet in hand, shoulders tense but steady. Whatever hesitation he had carried before was gone. Emily Carter stood near the back wall, hands clasped in front of her, watching everything closely. Another new figure entered the room moments later. Victor Lang. Victor Lang was a 52-year-old operations manager at St. Aurora, medium height with a stocky build and a face that seemed permanently set in controlled neutrality. His skin was light, his hair dark with streaks of gray, always combed tightly back. His eyes moved quickly, too quickly, never resting in one place for long. He had built his career not through visibility but through managing problems quietly, efficiently, and often invisibly. Years earlier, a near scandal involving faulty equipment had nearly cost him his position. Since then, he had learned one rule above all else: contain the issue before it becomes visible. He took a seat without speaking. Whitmore began. "We will proceed with reviewing the available data." Noah nodded once, starting with system logs. He connected the tablet to the screen. Lines of data appeared again, but this time organized, structured, undeniable. "Timestamps from last night's procedure," Noah explained. "Baseline comparison with standard system performance." He highlighted a section. "These delays shouldn't exist." Whitmore leaned forward slightly. Linda's eyes narrowed. Marcus remained still. James watched everything. Noah continued, his voice steadier now. "The system began showing irregular behavior approximately 7 minutes before the critical drop in patient stability." Victor shifted slightly in his chair. "That timing matters," Noah added. Emily spoke quietly from the back. "That's before Dr. Hale made the intervention." No one corrected her, because it was true. Noah moved to the next segment. "Now, this is where it changes." He paused, then brought up another layer of data. These entries were modified. The word hung in the room. Linda leaned forward. "Modified how?" Noah tapped the screen. "Original data overwritten, time gaps filled, but not perfectly." James stepped closer. "Meaning someone tried to correct the record?" Noah hesitated, then answered carefully. "Meaning someone tried to hide something." Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Whitmore's jaw tightened slightly. "Who has access to make those changes?" Noah didn't look away this time. "Senior operations clearance." All eyes moved, subtly but unmistakably, toward Victor Lang. Victor didn't react immediately. Then he exhaled slowly. "Systems aren't always perfect. Corrections are sometimes necessary to maintain functionality." Noah shook his head. "Not like this." Marcus finally spoke. "What was the original issue?" Noah shifted the data again. A warning signal appeared. Red, repeated. "I found earlier system alerts," Noah said, "hours before the procedure." Emily stepped forward slightly. "No one reported those." Victor's expression hardened. "Not all alerts require escalation." Marcus looked at him directly now. "These do." Another pause. Then Noah spoke again, quieter but more precise. "The system flagged instability in the cardiac support unit. It needed recalibration." James's voice cut in. "And that wasn't done." Victor didn't answer immediately. That was the answer. Across the room, Evan Blake stood near the door, having entered quietly earlier without drawing attention. His posture was tense now, arms crossed tightly. "That doesn't prove anything about the procedure itself," Evan said. Noah turned toward him. "It proves the system was compromised before Dr. Hale touched it." Evan's jaw tightened. "We all saw minor issues, that's normal." Emily shook her head. "Not like that." All eyes shifted to her. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. Emily Carter rarely raised her voice, but when she spoke now, it carried weight. "I was there," she said, "from the beginning to the end." She looked at Whitmore. At every critical moment, Dr. Hale responded exactly as he should have. When the system lagged, he adjusted. When the readings didn't match the patient's condition, he trusted the patient, not the machine. She paused, then added quietly, "He didn't cause the problem." The room held its breath because this wasn't just data anymore, it was testimony. Marcus didn't react outwardly, but something in the room shifted again. James nodded slightly. "That aligns with what I observed." Evan looked between them, tension rising. "You're all acting like this is clear, it's not." Noah didn't argue. He simply moved to the final display. "Camera footage," he said. The screen changed. Grainy at first, then clearer. The operating room Every movement captured, every second recorded. No one spoke as the footage played. Marcus at the head of the table, calm, controlled. Emily at the monitor, focused, precise. Evan, present, assisting. And the system, flickering, delaying, failing, before Marcus intervened. The moment came. The critical decision. Marcus stepped forward, acted, stabilized. The room remained silent as the footage ended, because now there was no gap, no interpretation needed, just sequence, cause, effect. Whitmore leaned back, slowly. Linda's expression had changed, not softer but sharper, more aware of the implications. Victor looked at the table, not at the screen, not at anyone else. James broke the silence. "This isn't a procedural failure," he said. "This is a systems failure." He let the words settle. And someone knew. No one spoke, because now the narrative had collapsed, not gradually, completely. Marcus stood where he had been the entire time, unmoved, unchanged, but no longer under question. Emily looked at him briefly, not with relief, but with confirmation. Because she had known. Now, everyone else did too. Outside the room, the hospital continued its motion. But inside, the truth had already taken its place, and it wasn't leaving. The reversal. By late afternoon, the sky over Chicago had cleared just enough for a thin beam of sunlight to break through the clouds, reflecting sharply against the glass exterior of St. Aurora. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but clear. What had been hidden beneath quiet authority and controlled narratives was now exposed, and the hospital, once defined by certainty, felt uncertain. The conference room had not emptied. It had transformed. No longer a place of quiet accusation, it now held the weight of undeniable evidence. The screen still displayed the final frame of the operating room footage. No one had moved to turn it off because no one could. Dr. Richard Whitmore remained seated, but his posture had shifted. The rigid certainty that once defined him had softened, not into weakness but into something more difficult. Accountability. Linda Graves stood beside him, reviewing notes on her tablet with a precision that had changed in tone. She was no longer managing a situation quietly, she was recalculating exposure. Victor Lang sat motionless, his earlier composure gone. The confidence of control had been replaced by stillness, the kind that comes when options narrow. Dr. Marcus Hale stood near the end of the table, exactly where he had been before. No movement, no visible reaction. But the space around him felt different now, because the room had changed its center. James Carter stepped forward, breaking the silence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I've spent 30 years in courtrooms," he said, his tone steady, deliberate. "And I've seen what happens when institutions choose protection over truth." His gaze moved across the room, stopping briefly on each face. "What I've just witnessed here," he continued, "is not a misunderstanding." A pause. It's a failure of responsibility. No one interrupted, because no one could argue with what had just been proven. James turned slightly toward Whitmore. "You moved to assign blame before reviewing evidence. You pressured a physician to step down without full investigation." Whitmore's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. Linda stepped in, voice controlled. "We acted based on the information available at the time." James looked at her. "No," he said calmly. "You acted based on the information you chose to prioritize." The distinction landed heavily, because it wasn't about what they knew. It was about what they ignored. Across the room, Noah Reed stood quietly, but his posture had changed. The hesitation that once held him back was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. He stepped forward again, tablet still in hand. "I've completed a full system report," he said. Whitmore looked up. "You already presented the logs." Noah shook his head slightly. "That was partial. This is the full sequence." He connected the tablet again. replacing the paused footage with a structured technical report. Timeline reconstruction, Noah explained. System performance, alert history, manual overrides, and user access logs. He moved through the data carefully, each section building on the last. The system flagged instability at 1842, he said, repeated warnings over the next hour. No escalation recorded. Victor shifted again in his seat. Noah continued. At 1957, the system entered a degraded state. At 2003, partial failure. He paused. Dr. Hale's intervention occurred at 2005. Emily stepped slightly closer, her voice low. After the failure. Yes, Noah confirmed. Evan Blake stood near the wall, silent now, arms no longer crossed but hanging at his sides. His earlier confidence had faded, not completely, but enough. Noah moved to the final section. User access logs show that system entries were modified at 2112, he said. Whitmore leaned forward slightly. By whom? Noah didn't hesitate. Victor Lang. The name didn't echo. It didn't need to, because everyone in the room had already reached that conclusion. Victor exhaled slowly, then looked up for the first time since the report began. It wasn't like that, he said, voice tight but controlled. I was correcting corrupted data. James stepped closer. You were correcting the record or rewriting it? Victor didn't answer. Linda spoke again, but this time her tone carried less control. Mr. Lang, altering system logs without disclosure is a serious violation. Victor looked at her, something sharper in his eyes now. You think I had a choice? He said. If that system failure had gone public immediately, this hospital would have been under investigation within hours. And instead, James replied calmly, you chose to risk a man's career. The words cut deeper than accusation, because they were accurate. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one wasn't uncertain. It was settled. Whitmore stood slowly. His movements were measured, but heavier than before. This situation will be addressed immediately, he said. He looked at Victor. You are suspended pending formal review. Victor didn't protest, because there was nothing left to argue. Whitmore then turned to Marcus. A brief pause, long enough to acknowledge what had happened. Dr. Hale, he said, the findings presented here clear you of all procedural fault. The words were formal, but their weight was real. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He didn't nod, didn't react. He simply stood there, because this wasn't victory. It was correction. Linda added, a formal statement will be released. The record will be amended. Emily exhaled quietly, tension leaving her shoulders for the first time since the night before. Across the room, Evan shifted again, his gaze dropping briefly before he looked away. The certainty he had carried earlier had been replaced by something else, recognition, not of Marcus, but of himself. James stepped back slightly, observing the room once more. Truth has a way of surfacing, he said. The question is how much damage is done before it does. He turned toward Marcus. For what it's worth, he added, you did exactly what you were supposed to do. Marcus met his gaze, then gave a single, small nod. Not gratitude, acknowledgement. Around them the hospital began to move again. But differently, because now the story had changed. Not completely, not instantly, but enough. Outside the conference room, word spread faster than any official statement could. The narrative shifted. Quietly, but clearly. Some staff members avoided eye contact for a different reason now. Others watched Marcus with something new, not suspicion, awareness. Near the nurse's station, Emily stood beside Marcus again. They're already talking, she said. Marcus glanced toward the corridor. They were before. Emily nodded slightly. This time it's different. Marcus didn't answer, but he knew, because the silence had changed. It was no longer about exclusion, it was about realization, and realization couldn't be undone. Not victory, but change. The next morning, Chicago felt different. Not warmer. The cold still pressed against the city, the wind still cutting through the streets, but clearer. The sky stretched open in a pale blue that hadn't been there in days, and the sunlight that touched the glass walls of St. Aurora seemed less distant. Inside the hospital, the rhythm had returned. But it wasn't the same rhythm. Dr. Marcus Hale walked through the main corridor as he always did, his pace steady, his posture unchanged. His white coat was the same. His expression was the same, calm, focused, composed, but the space around him was not. People didn't look away this time. They looked. Some nodded. Some hesitated before speaking. Some said nothing, but didn't avoid him. It wasn't acceptance, not fully, but it was awareness. At the nurse's station, Emily Carter was already there, reviewing charts. She looked up as Marcus approached, and for the first time since everything began, her expression wasn't tense. It was certain. "You're back on the schedule," she said. Marcus glanced at the screen. "I never left." Emily allowed herself a small smile. "That's not what they meant." A brief pause. Then she added, "They're talking about something else, too." Marcus looked at her. "Leadership review," she said. "Your name's being considered." Marcus didn't react immediately. Not surprise, not interest, just acknowledgement. Across the floor, movement shifted again. Evan Blake approached, not with the same confidence as before, not with the same posture. His steps were slower, measured. When he stopped in front of Marcus, there was a moment where neither of them spoke. Evan looked different up close now. Not physically, he was still tall, composed, controlled, but something in his expression had changed. The sharp certainty in his eyes had softened, not completely gone, but interrupted. "I read the final report," Evan said. Marcus nodded once. Another pause. Evan exhaled slightly. "I should have handled things differently." The words didn't come easily, because they weren't rehearsed. They were realized. Marcus didn't interrupt, didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at him, not judging, not dismissing, just listening. Evan continued quieter now. "I saw the system lag, I ignored it. Thought it was nothing." A brief pause. "That's on me." The admission settled between them. Marcus finally spoke. "What matters is what you do with that now." No accusation, no lecture, just a statement. Evan nodded slowly, and for the first time. There was no resistance in him. He stepped back, not pushed away, but choosing distance, because some realizations didn't need to be explained. They needed to be lived. Across the room, another figure approached, someone Marcus hadn't seen outside the conference setting before, Dr. Angela Ruiz. Angela Ruiz was a 45-year-old Latina cardiologist, medium height with a strong, grounded build. Her dark hair was tied neatly at the back, and her brown eyes carried both precision and warmth. Her face held the quiet confidence of someone who had earned her place through years of work in environments that didn't always welcome her. She spoke clearly, without hesitation, but never raised her voice unnecessarily. Years earlier, Angela had nearly left St. Aurora after being overlooked for a promotion she had clearly earned. She stayed, not because the system changed, but because she decided she would. Now, she stood in front of Marcus. "I reviewed the case," she said. Marcus nodded slightly. Angela held his gaze. "You did exactly what needed to be done." A pause. Then she added, "And you did it under pressure most people here wouldn't admit exists." Her tone wasn't emotional, but it was honest. Marcus inclined his head slightly. "Thank you." Angela didn't move right away. "There's a meeting later," she said, "full staff." Marcus looked at her. "They asked if you'd speak." Another pause, not hesitation, consideration. Marcus glanced around the hospital floor, at the people moving, at the ones watching, at the ones pretending not to, then back at Angela. "I'll be there," he said. The auditorium inside St. Aurora was rarely used for full staff gatherings, but today every seat was filled. Doctors, nurses, technicians, administrative staff, even people who had no direct involvement in the case, because this wasn't just about a procedure anymore, it was about something else. At the front of the room stood Dr. Richard Whitmore. His posture was still straight, but his presence had changed. "Before we begin," he said, voice steady, "there will be a formal statement released regarding the recent incident." He paused. "The findings are clear. Dr. Marcus Hale acted within full protocol and under conditions that were not properly disclosed." No one spoke, because they had already heard, but hearing it here, publicly, was different. Whitmore continued. "The hospital acknowledges its failure to conduct a complete review before drawing conclusions. That was as close to an apology as he had ever come." Then he stepped aside and looked toward Marcus. Marcus walked to the front slowly. Not rushed, not dramatic, just steady. He stood there for a moment, looking out across the room, at the faces, some familiar, some uncertain, some changed. He didn't start immediately, because what he was about to say didn't need speed, it needed clarity. "When I first came here," Marcus began, voice calm, even, "I believed that doing the work would be enough." A brief pause. "I believed that if you stayed consistent, if you stayed focused, the rest would follow." He looked across the room again. "But that's not always how it works." Silence, because everyone understood what he meant. Marcus continued. What happened wasn't just about a system failure. Another pause. It was about how quickly assumptions can replace questions. His gaze moved, not accusing, but direct. And how easily silence can become agreement. No one moved. No one interrupted. Marcus's voice didn't rise, but it carried. "Respect isn't something you earn after being proven right," he said. "It's something you choose to give before you have all the answers." A shift in the room. Subtle, but real. He didn't point fingers, didn't name anyone. Didn't need to. "Every decision we make here affects someone else," he continued, "not just patients, each other." A pause. "And if we're going to be responsible for lives, we have to be responsible for how we treat the people standing next to us." The room remained still, because this wasn't defense, it wasn't justification, it was reflection. Marcus stepped back slightly, not finishing, but concluding, because everything that needed to be said had been. Whitmore stepped forward again. The meeting moved on. Formalities, announcements, processes, but none of it carried the same weight, because the moment had already happened. Later that evening, the hospital returned to its normal rhythm, but something had changed. Emily stood beside Marcus again at the station, reviewing patient charts. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Marcus didn't look up. "Yes, I did." Emily watched him for a moment, then nodded, because she understood. Across the floor, Evan worked quietly, focused in a way he hadn't been before. Angela spoke with a group of doctors, her tone steady, her presence grounded, and Marcus remained exactly who he had been from the beginning. Not louder, not different, just clearer, because in the end, this wasn't about proving anyone wrong, it was about making sure they saw differently, and that was enough. Everyday life is full of small moments where we choose how to see others. This story reminds us that judgment often comes faster than truth, and silence can sometimes support what is wrong. In our work, in our families, and in our communities, we should pause before we assume, listen before we decide, and treat people with fairness before they are forced to prove themselves. Real strength is not in winning over others, but in helping people see what is right. There will be times when doing the right thing feels lonely, when others misunderstand you, when the easiest path is to stay quiet. But those are the moments that define who we are. Choose integrity. Choose patience. Choose to stand for truth even when it costs you comfort. Let this story be a reminder that respect should never depend on background, appearance, or status. We all have the power to create a better environment simply by how we treat the people around us every day. If this message speaks to you, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about where you are watching from and what part of the story touched you the most. Subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories like this. May God bless you, protect your path, and give you strength in difficult moments. If you believe in choosing truth and kindness, type Amen in the comments and let your voice be heard.